name is Jan Robertson. I'm originally from San Francisco, but many, many years ago, my first husband and I were transferred to Michigan. I started a late career of selling real estate and eventually went to work for Robertson Brothers, who's one of the bigger builders in southeastern Michigan. I met a wonderful gentleman by the name of Carl Freiwald, who was one of the designers who we worked with.
Carl Freiwald was a close friend, and when I started in the business with my dad 45 years ago, one of the first projects we did was a new condominium project, which was a brand new thing in Detroit at the time, and we hired a consultant to help us with that, and the consultant hired Jacobson's to do the design work on our 5 furnished models, and Carl was the head designer at Jacobson's. They ended up becoming partners, starting their own design firm.
I got to know Carl quite well before he got sick and then during his long illness. Eventually one of our sons moved in with him to take care of him after his partner died. And I think a lot of people really didn't know what was going on with him, but eventually he had to stay home and take care of himself and try out the experimental drugs that were available at the time, which were not many, but he tried them out. I think his last couple of years were pretty tough. But you know, there were times when he would have a resurgence of energy and want to get back into the world. He went out and bought another car. He went over to his design firm to make sure the key worked, and actually came to Sarasota with us his last year. And by then it was almost Christmas time, and by May he was gone. I think the saddest thing about this disease, certainly in those days, was that a lot of people were afraid to come and visit him, afraid to touch him. He was in the hospital one time, and I remember a volunteer bringing greeting cards to him with her gloves on. So that's where we were in those days. I think we've come a long, long way. But certainly for me personally, it was very sad to watch.
When he got it, it didn't have a name. So it must have been at least 10 years earlier. I can remember him telling me when he was in U of M hospital for a week and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, and he had all sorts of symptoms of stuff and nobody knew what it was, and they literally sent him home without any diagnosis. And I think he did that at least twice that I can remember. And then I still don't remember when it got the name AIDS, and I can't even, because he was one of the early people who got it. All I remember is the huge stigmatism that there was back then of one, having AIDS, 2, its tie into the gay community, and 3, everybody had their own. It's like Ebola now, you know, you can't touch anybody who's got it, you'll get it, and all those sorts of things. Even though there was a lot of proof otherwise. I mean, Jan and I never had it. We always touched Carl. We kissed him. We were happy to be around him. And yet, his friends in the gay community wouldn't even come visit him. It was awful. It really was. Jan and I felt so bad and so sorry for him, and because the stigma was terrible. His partner refused to get tested, and once they figured out what it was, he didn't want to know. He didn't want to know anything. He didn't want to know nothing. He wanted to go on living whatever life he had. He wanted to go living it whatever way he did. He had an ex-wife and a couple of kids, and so he just sort of buried his head in the sand. The rest of his family, I thought his mother was fairly supportive, as was his brother. It was in like November of 1987, and he saw me moving into my parents, and he was sad for me because obviously my marriage was over, and he knew my former wife. But he also, at the same time, I remember he told me he had AIDS, and we just sort of acknowledged each other's pain, if you will, at that time. He went to the University of Michigan when I was there. He was in the School of Architecture. And he was in a fraternity, and he flunked out of the architecture school because he was so busy playing bridge and drinking a little too much, as we all did in college. And we ended up, Carl was in AA, as Jan and I both are. So we have that connection too at the same time. But so So we would have these meetings, and Carl would come in, and he and the architect would argue, and they would argue over who had the pencil to draw what it is that they wanted done in whatever the room was or whatever the exterior was. I used to laugh at these guys. It was all about who had the pencil.
He had a definite design in mind when he did each and every model. There was one development where we had 4 attached condo models, and each one was totally different one from the other. In the end, I think used to influence some of the buyers as to their thought process, not necessarily in the floor plan, but the way Carl had put it together. He'd just come up with it, and an unbelievable talent.
The first model had just gotten painted, and it had a fire engine red kitchen. It had lime green walls and a powder blue ceiling in the living room. And my dad walked in there and said, "Oh my God, this guy doesn't understand our customer. Nobody would ever buy that in a million years. This is just absolutely terrible." Well, as it was one of our most popular models, and everybody remembered it because it had the red kitchen.
His attention to detail was absolutely remarkable until just about the last day. In the last couple of weeks that he was still living, my son told me to drive him out to Saugatuck to take one last look.
Yeah.
So he was a very, very sentimental guy. Had a huge heart.
But the other thing about Carl is he was one fabulous businessman. This guy had a sense, and he knew how to make money. He knew how to handle people. He knew how to hire people. He was a really, really good businessman.
He decided he wanted to plan his funeral right down to the flowers that were going to be on the altar. So we did that, and then he said to me, "And I'd like to have a party back here at the house after it's over." So about 200 people came to the party he arranged. None of those guys came before.
Felt that nobody should be treated that way, and he had done so much to help our business.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think he was the one guy that really made our business take off the way it took off because of his architectural and interior design genius. I mean.